can't really tell the story without first mentioning the disaster that occurred in Vanuatu, because I grew up in hurricane country down on the Gulf Coast of Texas, and I feel a little affinity for that. Now, my town was 15 miles inland from the Gulf, and we didn't live in a thatched hut, so my experience is considerably different from what happened out there. As a matter of fact, I loved storms. As a kid, I loved hurricanes. They were great. It seemed like every year we would get storms coming in that had been spawned by hurricanes that were going someplace else. And down there, the land is completely flat, so that you have more sky. And these big purple and black clouds would come rolling in. And you have lightning every 5 or 10 minutes and thunder. It was better than HD, just fantastic stuff. And then every second or third year, we would get a hurricane that was coming right at us. And they were great, because first of all, we got out of school. If a hurricane that came in the summer was kind of a waste, but they come and you get out of school, and they would nearly always knock out the power. And as a kid, in my house anyway, we would get in the living room and we'd all get down on the floor and play board games by candlelight. And between turns, you get up and go check the windows and the doors to see if the wind's blown any rain past the seals. And then you mop up, and that goes on all night. Of course, not for me. I was sleeping as a kid. My parents would do most of it. But that was important because most of the damage from a hurricane is done by water. And the insurance company only pays for the wind damage, which is a metaphor for something in the private sector, I don't know. But, so my parents never evacuated. They always rode out the storms. My mother was not about to leave her house to the tender mercies of the storm, and my father was not going to pay for damages if he didn't have to. So we stayed put, and we did. I remember one storm in particular. I was in the 4-H club about 4th or 5th grade, and I was raising rabbits in the backyard. And so we kept looking out the window to see how the rabbits were doing while the hurricane was blowing. And one of the hutches blew over. Now this was a duplex. I had a doe on either side of the cage, and one of them had a litter of bunnies. And when the thing blew over and the roof came off, I had white rabbits hopping all over the yard. And we didn't have a fenced yard, which meant they were hopping up and down looking for shelter. And they were my rabbits. So went in the garage and I got a crab net, which is kind of like a butterfly net, but it's sturdier, and went out in the backyard. Now, going out in the storm like that, you have to keep your back to the wind, because otherwise the rain is blowing sideways, it'll blow in your eyes, you can't see what you're doing. So you have to keep your back to the wind, move around, and catch a bunny, take it inside, you get it dried off, go back and catch another one. And I got them all. I mean, that is fantastic. It's really a real thrill. That's what hurricanes were. They break up the routine. You get to go out and do things you'd never get to do otherwise. It's just a lot of fun. Until 1961. Now, 61, if you recall, was the last year that reads the same way, right side up and upside down. And that's a phenomenon that's not going to happen again until 2009. So for those of you who missed it, you'll probably have a rich and fulfilled life anyway, but just have to try harder. Anyway, the big event in 61 was that I started high school. And Lyndon Johnson got to be vice president, but he wasn't from our part of Texas, so it didn't matter. I started high school, and we had a new school. We were only the second freshman class starting. And we'd barely gotten our books or our desks, and Hurricane Carla came through. Now, if you look it up, Carla is still rated as the most intense and powerful storm to ever hit the U.S. It didn't take the most lives and didn't cause the most damage. That's happened a lot of times with storms since 61 because people have moved more people and more stuff in the way. But when Carla started out slow, it started as a Category 3, huge, massive storm, and we had plenty of time to prepare. My dad had a store, and I helped him put up plywood over the plate glass windows. First time he'd ever done that. And so we put up the boards, and then we went home to hunker down. By this time I was out of the rabbit business, but air conditioning was not really popular in all the homes at that time. And when my father got a new air conditioning unit for the store, he brought the store's unit to us. And so we were probably the only house in the county, if not the state, that had a commercial air conditioning tower in the backyard. Some of you may remember those. You know, concrete blocks, big wooden box that stood about 6 feet high with slats in the side, shower in the top, and a reservoir in the bottom. And we had this in the center of the backyard. Now, Carla out there was category 3, as I said, spinning around, and the day before it made landfall, it bumped up to category 5, which is how I got in the record books, because it came ashore with a vengeance. And we sat in the house and we watched this tower out in the backyard. And it would lift up and drop back down. Tip up, drop back down. And we watched this for hours, off and on. I mean, we did other things. But, and then someone got the idea that if we took out the slats, we would probably reduce the wind resistance. And I don't recall who had the idea, but I know who went out and got the slats out of it. And it wasn't as much fun as chasing rabbits. And as it turned out, it didn't make a whole lot of difference, because about 4 hours later, the wind just picked up this skeletonized tower and dumped it in the yard. Now, over at the school, which was only a couple blocks away, we were very proud of having a big new electronic scoreboard in the football stadium that was guaranteed to withstand 170-mile-an-hour winds, and it was shredded. Our principal lived on the other side of the school near a motel, and the roof of the motel was lifted up and dropped in his backyard. The drive-in movie theater was completely destroyed. They never rebuilt that. But that was just the wind. What Carla did, we were 15 miles in from the Gulf, and Carla pushed a tidal wave in 14 miles. Now, I had friends who lived on that side of town. One friend in particular told me that when he got home, the watermark in his house was a foot from the ceiling. And his piano had floated from the living room into the garage. So the damage done to a lot of the people who went to school with me was just massive in that area. We went out driving, and we saw that there were the bloated carcasses of cows hanging in the telephone wires. That's how high the water had gotten. Now, it's an ill wind that blows no good. And before the power went out, we were watching our local newsman, a fellow named Dan Raven, who put on a raincoat and went out in the storm. And he was the first one to do that. Now, everybody does it. But this made him a star, and and because of his reporting during the storm, he was hired by the network and moved up. Before he left, though, he interviewed a kid who went to school with me. Now, Robert Dunn was a year ahead of me, and we knew each other to talk to, but a year ahead of me, we didn't cross paths very often. And his family had also elected to ride out the storm. Unfortunately, they lived on the Gulf side of town, and they also lived near Bastrop Bayou, and for any Yankees in here, that's a river. So they were going to ride out the storm. By the time they realized they'd miscalculated, there was nowhere to go. The water was too high. Now, Robert was the oldest of 5 adopted children, and the nearest family was an aunt and uncle who had 3 sons of their own, and they'd all come to Robert's house. And as the water got into the house, all 12 of them moved up to the attic. And they knocked out a couple boards so they could see what was going on, and the wind took out some more. And when the water got up to the attic, they pushed Robert up to the roof, and then they're going to hand up the other children. He reached down for his brother, and the roof washed away from the house. He floated on the roof for 3 days, and then it came down in a field 6 miles away. Local family took him in, and he asked if he could stay with them until he graduated, and they said it was all right. Now, back at my house, when the storm was over and we went outside, we saw, of course, we'd lost our cooling tower, and we looked at the roof, and we had lost 2 asphalt shingles. 2. We got away very easy compared to a lot of my classmates and other kids in the school. Even my father's store, which was right in the center of town, came through unscathed. Now, it was destroyed later, but the fact that the rise of shopping centers wiped out the business. So the next summer, we sold out and moved to South Carolina. And the reason for telling you all of this is so that you understand what I mean when I say, I like living in Northern Virginia.